Welcome to Season 2 of the Erotic Realm podcast. I'm Em, a sexologist, erotic psychology researcher, and nerd obsessed with psychosexuality. I'm also a 24/7 kinkster. If you'd like to go deeper into my work, you can find everything I'm doing, including articles, surveys, psychology of desire case files, and the newly announced Desire Salon membership at psychologyofdesire.com. And now for today's episode. The following episode explores male submission, not as weakness, but as devotion, discipline, and a sovereign choice. In this conversation, I'm joined by Taylor Ellwood, a submissive, service-oriented top, men's coach, and writer living in a 24/7 female-led relationship. We explore what it means for a man to choose submission, not from collapse or people-pleasing, but from strength, clarity, and purpose. We talk about the unexpected journey from dominance into submission, the difference between being nice and being devoted, and how mature masculinity is forged through responsibility rather than performance. This is a conversation about shadow work, discipline, erotic polarity, and why submission, when chosen, can become a deeply stabilizing force in a man's life. Enjoy. Hi everyone, and welcome to the Erotic Realm. Today I'm excited to be exploring the erotic realm of Taylor. Welcome, Taylor.
Thank you. Happy to be here, and thank you for having me on your show.
Of course. So before we step into your eroticism and kink, can you just share a little bit about your day-to-day life right now, how you're living, working, your hobbies, what you're up to when you're not exploring eroticism?
Well, I actually am a men's coach for submissive men and sub-curious men who want to explore their eroticism. So that's actually and just explore how they show up as men in their lives. So that's one way. And then I'm also a writer, an author of numerous books, and I also teach people about magic. So kind of all of that. And then I'm also reading and writing and practicing martial arts, including I'm currently working on getting my brown belt in Red Tiger Kung Fu, and I'm also conducting a long distance relationship with my sweetheart. So
Aw, cute.
yeah.
Amazing. Okay, that all sounds very interesting, and I'm sure we'll get into a lot of that through our conversation. So you mentioned that you work with submissive men. So my next question for you was about your eroticism. Do you identify as a submissive man?
I do identify as a submissive man. It took me a while to get there, but it's something that there's been inklings of it throughout my life, and then eventually I finally came to a full recognition and acceptance of it.
Mm-hmm. So in terms of your kinky identity, is the best word for you submissive, or are there other identities that you also label yourself as?
Well, I would label myself as a submissive and then also as a service top.
Mm-hmm.
I think those would basically be the accurate labels for me in terms of BDSM kink labels.
Mm-hmm. And in terms of your sexuality, are you a heterosexual man? How do you identify in that way?
I would say, yeah, I would say heterosexual. I mean, yeah, that pretty much fits.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Labels can be tricky, right?
Yeah.
So you've said that if someone told you a year ago that you'd be living in a 24/7 DS dynamic as a submissive, you wouldn't have believed them. Why is that?
Well, because for a long time I identified, as a switch, but there were a lot of submissive tendencies that were there, but I wasn't like fully in alignment with that. I remember somebody once pointing it out, and I was resistant to it, and we can get into why that is, because it's certainly work that I encounter around talking with other men about their own submissive desires. But
Mm-hmm.
also part of it was because at the time I was in the midst of taking a class called How to Become a Dominant Man, that was taught by Andrew of Infinite Devotion. And so it was kind of one of those things where I kind of had to go in the opposite direction in order to fully accept my submissive desires, because it was like I came to realize I'm like, this doesn't really fit me. This isn't what I want. This isn't actually who I am. And I mean, great for the men that identify that way, but that's not who I am or who I want to be.
Mm. So you mentioned it happened while you were taking a class. Was there a specific part of the class that brought out this shift in you, or was it more of a gradual recognition?
I think it was more of a gradual recognition where, like, there were certain things about the class that I identified and agreed with, and part of that was because of my work in the men's movement and what I see as versions of healthy masculinity, such as taking responsibility and accountability. Like those were things that were wrapped into that class, as well as defining what your values are, things along those lines. But at the same time, there was a part of me that was like, I don't necessarily want to be the one who's actually quote unquote leading the relationship. I actually don't want to lead in the relationship. I want to operate from a place of service. And that felt more right for me
Mm.
than operating from a place of I've got to be the one who's in charge and calling the shots.
Hmm. Okay, fascinating. So you mentioned healthy masculinity there. One of the biggest themes from the first year of the erotic realm last year, when I spoke to men, particularly dominant men, but it also came out in the men exploring their submission as well, was that they really understood this idea of toxic masculinity, but they were struggling to find resources and people speaking about, well, what actually is healthy masculinity. So, can you speak a little bit more to that and how you would define that and what you've learnt around the healthy presentation of what it means to be masculine?
Yeah, I'm gonna actually share a little bit of my journey into it.
Please.
Um, I got divorced when I was 44 or 45. I was 44. And within a few months, I got into a rebound relationship way too soon, wasn't ready for it, wasn't remotely in a good place with myself. And within a year, I broke that off. And as a result of breaking up with that person, I kind of was like, okay, I got to do something differently here. And one of the questions I kind of came away with is, what does it even mean to be a man? And I didn't feel like I'd grown up with that. I didn't feel like there was a real good guide toward that. And I took a course on breakups because I'm like, I don't even know how to handle breakups. So I clearly need some help here.
Mm.
And and in that breakup course, one of the books I ended up reading was a book called Iron John by Robert Bly. And then I read Magician, Warrior, King, Lover by Douglas Gillette and Roger Moore. And these were classic books of the men's movement and the mythopoetic movement. And as a result of reading those books and doing some digging in and reading some other classic books like Fire in the Belly by Sam Keane, I eventually found my way to the Mankind Project. And the Mankind Project does a lot of work around helping men kind of go through an experience that allows them to discover, first of all, that they're not alone. Because a lot of men out there in the world feel alone, regardless of whether you identify as dominant, submissive, the switch, or vanilla, or whatever. There are a lot of men out there who feel really alone in the world, and even when they're in relationship with somebody. And for me, that was one of the things that really stood out was when I got into a Zoom room and there was a bunch of men there, and I'm feeling scared because I'm like, these guys are going to make fun of me. They're going to laugh at me for sharing what I'm sharing. And then they started sharing what they were sharing, and I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm not alone. All the pressures that I feel around being a man, all the things that stress me out, all the frustrations and everything else, for the first time in my life, I didn't feel alone. And so for the last few years, I've been exploring the men's movement, not the red pill version. I want to be very clear about that.
Hmm.
But what I consider to be the healthy version, the version that's kind of that really looks at it from the place of like, how do we show up better in the world around us? How do we become safer for ourselves so that we can be safer for the people in our lives? How do we take responsibility and charge for ourselves and also like recognize like the way that men have shown up in the world, how they have hurt themselves, how they've hurt others, how they've been hurt. Hurt men hurt people,
Hmm.
and hurt men got hurt at some point too. So I've kind of gone through Mankind Project, Uncivilized, a couple other organizations, and I'm still doing this work. I actually just joined a 6 month cohort where we're exploring puberty, pornography, and masculinity, and like
Mm.
how, like the intersection of all that, and like how do we show up as more embodied men in the world. And I share that too because I listened to to some of those episodes that you had, and it's like I wanted to almost like say to the people who were talking, like, wait a minute, there
Hmm.
are healthy masculinity movements, there are things out there, but I can see how they haven't intersected that much with the BDSM and kink world, and that's one of the reasons why I coach the men that I coach, because I think that it's really important for men to see that there can be a form of healthy masculinity. And I've actually written a book on it called The Quest for Mature Masculinity, where I share some of my own adventures and experiences around, what it mean, what does it mean to be a man, and how can I be a man in a healthier and better way in this world than what I was raised with.
Incredible. Thank you for sharing all of those resources. I'm sure a lot of the men listening will be searching for them. I really appreciate that. So, in terms of your own exploration throughout everything that you've done, what's been your biggest learning around masculinity? And perhaps if you could speak a little bit to what these men are coming to you for as well. What's the biggest issue that they're coming to you for coaching around?
When I have men come to me for coaching, a lot of times it's really around accepting their own submissive nature, because there is, for a lot of men, there's this pressure around how you show up in the world around you. And I will say one critique I do have of the men's movement, even like the healthy version, is that a lot of times the idea is, well, men need to lead.
Mm,
Like you need to show up and lead. And I'm like, well, that's not true. Not every man wants to lead. Not every man feels that way. And
mm-hmm,
when you have terms such as cuck or snowflake or whatever being tossed around, and not being tossed around in a way where it's like respectful of the person or anything, but it's actually used to diminish the person,
mm,
that's part of where I see, like, where a man might be like, oh, I feel a lot of shame around accepting my submissive desires, whatever those desires might be, or I feel a lot of shame because, or hesitancy around being in a female-led relationship, because then, like, I'm supposed to be the one who's supposed to lead, and that's what I'm hearing. And so that's part of what I end up working with men around. One of the other areas is around helping men have the hard conversations, learning to speak up. The only acceptable emotion that a lot of men are told they can feel is anger, and a lot of men are afraid of even feeling their own anger.
mm,
So, creating a space where a man can feel the fullness of his emotions in his body, and knowing that he can speak up and express what he needs to speak up and express, and do it in a way where he's able to regulate his emotions and not hijack the entire conversation, but also not shut down, is a huge, huge component of the work that I do right now with
mm-hmm.
men.
Such important work. Thank you for doing it. So, a common theme that's been explored throughout the erotic realm so far has also been women sharing that they felt that they were submissive when they first started exploring their kinky sexuality, and then later realizing that they were actually a switch or a dominant. And you've had the opposite experience. Do you think that submissive men may commonly mistakenly think that they're dominant, as there are more dominant men in the community? So it's a role that many are falling into at first before they've discovered their authentic sexuality?
I think that's one of the reasons why.
Mm-hmm.
Because there will be that, like, okay, most of the men around me are dominant, so I guess that's what I need to be, because that's what is there, and and also because there's this expectation, well, there aren't women out there who are going to want to dominate me. And also, even there might be, with a submissive man, he might also kind of come to a bit of an awakening when he's like, oh, I've submitted. Well, now she's the one leading the relationship. How do I navigate that and understand that? But the other component of it that I think is just as important to call out is that in mainstream society in general, we're still dealing with a patriarchal framework. And that patriarchal framework insists on putting the pressure on men that they have to show up a certain way. And that's typically in the quote unquote the role of leadership, even though a lot of those men don't necessarily want that. And I think that it's fundamentally cut off men from a connection with not only the feminine in relationship to women, but with the feminine within themselves, and being able to actually connect with that and do it in a way that allows for a reverence and a form of service and presence that men desperately crave and want, but are missing out on because they're not allowed to acknowledge it in themselves within society.
Mm. Mm. So, how do men acknowledge the feminine in themselves and connect to it?
I think first and foremost, learning to get back in touch with their bodies and with their emotions.
Mm-hmm.
And to be clear, I don't think that feeling emotions is inherently feminine or inherently masculine. But I think that the way our society structures things, or at least Western society tends to structure things, I'll speak to that because I'm a white Western man, so that's what I know, is that, masculine is active, feminine is passive. Masculine is thinking, feminine is feeling. These are very rudimentary ways of categorizing things that we still use as a way to simplify our lives, but we do it in a way that's ultimately harmful to ourselves. So I think that for a man to discover, oh, wait a minute, I actually have a full range of emotions. I feel anger, I feel anxiety, I feel fear, I feel love, I feel joy, and I can feel all of these things in the span of a day is huge.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of men don't know how to handle the fullness of those emotions at first, or the fullness of being in touch with their body. I mean, one of the saddest things that I think is really evident is that for men, a lot of times when they feel most in touch with their bodies is during sex, as opposed to any other time. And don't get me wrong, sex can be a joy and a pleasure, but if that's the only time that you're actually connecting to your body, there's something missing there. And so it's one of those cases where learning to get in touch with the sensual and sensuous nature of ourselves can sometimes require a bit of a reorientation around what I'll put it in quotes, feminine, because that's the easiest way to put it. But it may require that of us. And so that's one of the things that I think men need more of in their
Mm-hmm.
lives.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. Very well said. Thank you. I'm curious a bit more about your specific kink journey now, because you mentioned that you were married previously and you've been on this
Mhm.
journey with your dominant self and your submissive self. How did you actually come to discover kink? Was it before your marriage, during, after? How did this world open up to you?
So I've actually been married twice. I
Mm-hmm.
got into kink, I'd probably say in the mid 2000s. It's like 2005, 2006 is when I first found out about it and started getting into it with a girlfriend at the time. And at that time, I identified as a switch. Um, but I think even before then, I'd always had kind of a fascination. I didn't really fully recognize it of like being taken and dominated by like older women. Um, in my first marriage, my wife and I at the time, we actually ended up writing a book called Kink Magic, where we explored the intersection between BDSM and sex magic. Um, and that came out a long time ago. It's out of print now. We ended up taking it out of print after we got divorced. In my second marriage, it started out as an open relationship, but then she decided that she didn't want it to be an open relationship. And I was kind of going through a nice guy phase, I'll put it that way, where I wasn't being really authentic or with myself. And I ended up settling for like a vanilla monogamous relationship for a long time. So it was really interesting when I got out of that marriage because suddenly then I got to start exploring my kink journey again. And at first it was kind of going back to what I knew. Oh, I'm a switch, or I'll top somebody. And then I explored how to become I took the class how to become a dominant man because I was in a relationship where I was trying to figure out, I was with somebody who identified as submissive, and I was trying to figure out like how do I step up into this role that she had previously been in with other people. That ultimately didn't work out, but it was a really good lesson for me, and it helped me recognize, well, that's not what I am. And then in the relationship that I'm in now, that became very clear with my mistress when we met and we interacted with each other. And one of the things I found was like right from the beginning, she just kind of effortlessly knew how to take control. And she did it in a very subtle way, in the way that I'd experienced to some degree with some other woman in the past, but she did it in a way where she called attention to it to just kind of demonstrate, like we both kind of came to this realization of, oh, you're really a submissive. And she's like, yeah, I can totally see that with you and why you're drawn to me in that way. So then we started exploring that, and that's really been what I've been living since I've been with her.
Mm.
And it's been probably the most fulfilling relationship that I've ever had because she meets me in every way on every level, but we do it in a way where I'm not feeling like I have to be in control of everything. If anything, I'm allowed to just kind of let that go. And that is
Mm.
actually one of those safest spaces I've ever been in.
Mm. Beautiful. I'm so happy you found each other. That sounds really enriching. Hmm. So you mentioned a whole bunch of things there that I'd love to know more about. One of them was the intersection of BDSM and sex magic. So a lot of people hear sex magic and they have one of two reactions, one being very positive, tell me more, and another is, oh, that sounds kind of scary. So I'd love it if you could speak a little bit to what is the intersection between BDSM and sex magic and how do they actually combine?
So sex magic is essentially a practice where we are marrying metaphysical forces, spiritual forces to sex, and it can happen in a couple different ways. It could be, for example, practicing sex magic with a spirit. It could be practicing sex magic with a partner or multiple partners. It can take the form of vanilla sex magic where there's no kink involved, and it can also take the form of BDSM and kink. So, for example, in the case of BDSM and kink, it could be like, okay, we're already taking some of the rituals that we do, like if in the case of like a dominant submissive dynamic, and adding a magical component to it, so that like when I kneel to my mistress, I'm also kneeling to the goddess. When she worships my cock, she's worshiping the masculine. I'm just kind of throwing these back and forth a little bit here. But you kind of get the idea. And then the other aspect could be, okay, I'm going to use a flogger or a cane or a paddle or something like that, but we're going to use it ritualistically, and part of it's going to be to direct the attention of the person toward a practical magical working, and we've got a symbol or a sigil that we're using and charging during the play of sex. So there's a variety of different purposes there. For the people who are kind of like, oh, I don't know if this is such a good idea. First of all, I want to acknowledge that I get it, and sometimes it isn't necessarily a good idea. I've had sex magic dynamics where there was the potential for abuse there. One of the people that I was with, I had to clear out a lot of that energy and that ritual afterwards when we broke up, because it was just something that it was like a dynamic that was like really took us in deep, but it was something that when it didn't work out, it was kind of like, oh, I got to clear all this out. And that took a long time. And there was an energetic effect to it. But I think when it's structured right and done respectfully, and when both people are fully or more are fully consenting, I think it can be a really beautiful experience that lends a certain amount of magic to the experience. And the other thing I'll say at the same time is for anyone doing it is remember to balance it out and sometimes just have some good old fun, kinky sex in whatever
Mm-hmm.
form that takes for you.
Mm-hmm. And is sex magic something that you can practice on your own as well? Can you develop your own practice without a partner?
Definitely. There are definitely autoerotic practices that you can apply. Everything from edging to um, exploring just a different multi-sensory experiences that bring you to different states of consciousness. I've done all of that. And of course, some of it can also be done with spirits, which are non-corporeal, but nonetheless you can nonetheless have a very intimate relationship with the understanding that that typically differs from what you would normally think of as a flesh and blood relationship.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned non-corporeal. What does that mean exactly?
Well, by non-corporeal, I mean that they don't have a material manifest body.
Right. Mm-hmm.
So if I'm working with a daemon or an angel or a fairy or a god or goddess or something like that, they don't necessarily have a physical body, but that doesn't mean that I'm still not interacting with their essence and their energy, and that can't be done in the context of sex magic.
Mm.
There's still something going on there.
Okay. Fascinating. Now, one of the traditions on the podcast is exploring a quote with you. And today I want to bring in a quote from Viktor Frankl, who was, of course, a psychiatrist and Holocaust survivor whose work centered on meaning as a psychological necessity, not comfort. And he wrote, "What man actually needs is not a tensionless state, but the striving and struggling for a worthwhile goal." So when you hear Frankl describing meaningful tension, does that resonate with how you personally experience submission, not as ease or relief all the time, but perhaps as direction and purpose?
Absolutely. And it also fits hand in hand with men's work,
Mm-hmm.
because when having a sense of purpose and a sense of mission that is greater than myself brings that necessary level of tension and focus and direction. And then having that in the DS dynamic that I'm in also brings it in the same way because there's that act of service, but there is also and devotion and also surrender to that tension and allowing that tension to create both the eroticism and the very real focus on on the community that we're creating together.
Mm-hmm. So if submission was stripped of its difficulty and demand, would it still feel meaningful to you?
I don't think it would,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
because if I'm submitting and there's not some level of, I might wouldn't even say difficulty, but some level of tension there, I think that there's something essentially lacking that brings that a sense of eros and movement to the dynamic.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I want to talk a little bit more about your men's work now. So, another thing that quite often comes up in the podcast and just people I speak to in general is that many people and men confuse people pleasing with submission. How do you help men tell the difference between submitting to someone and being a people pleaser?
This kind of goes back to I labeled myself earlier as a nice guy in
Mm,
my second marriage. And so there's a book called No More Mr. Nice Guy by Robert Glover, and it's a really good book that I highly recommend. There's a real difference between codependent, people-pleasing nice guy behaviors. The nice guy he's going to, for example, go out and he'll say, like, I'll mow the lawn, I'll clean the dishes, I'll cook the food, and in return, I'm going to hope that she's going to have sex with me. And I'm not going to express that I'm doing this, that's why I'm doing it, but that's going to be the covert contract, the hidden contract that's in place. It's not spoken out loud, but it's something I hope will happen. And I'm doing all these things basically to control or manage the relationship. This is the way that a lot of men operate in the world right now. Whether you identify as submissive or not. In fact, I think it's kind of ironic that in some ways there are a lot of what indicates to me that there are more submissive men out there is that there are a lot of nice guys out there, but they're not like consciously in touch with that desire to serve in a good way. They're operating in shadow.
mm,
And so the difference really boils down to choice, conscious choice. So for me, as a submissive man, where I'm operating from is a place where I am consciously choosing to submit and to surrender, to be led by the feminine, to be led by my mistress. And I'm not doing any of the things that I'm doing from a place of covert contract. I mean, we'll sit and we'll talk about like, okay, here's the things that I want. And I do think that one thing I've said in multiple spaces is that as a nice guy, I didn't speak up for what I really wanted, needed, or longed for. But as a submissive man, I have done more speaking up now than I ever did before. I've
mm-hmm,
had to speak up more because she's not a mind reader. She doesn't know what I want automatically. I mean, she can anticipate, she can get some ideas, but if I'm putting that on her in a very real sense, I'm actually setting it up for what I'll call negative tension, the resentment and the things that kind of spill out sideways in a relationship. Whereas if I just speak up and say, this is what I want, she knows. Now, that doesn't mean she's going to automatically give it to me. And I
Mm-hmm.
think that's a really important thing to acknowledge. Like when as a submissive man, I don't automatically get what I want.
Right.
But the important thing is that I am speaking up for what I want. And I think that one of the challenges that a lot of men face right now is they don't even know what they want.
Mm.
And they're not used to speaking up for what they want. So being able to have the conversation and say, I really want this dynamic, or even something as simple as I really want to go and do this activity with my friends or something like that can be one of the biggest, most important steps that a man takes because he starts to actually identify what he wants, not for the sake of trying to please her, not for the sake of trying to get something, not for the sake of avoiding abandonment in the relationship. He stops abandoning himself. And because he stops abandoning himself, he's able to show up with presence and awareness in the relationship. And then at that point, she's going to be able to feel like, oh, okay, like he's really here. I don't
Mm-hmm.
have to try and reach him. I don't have to fight so hard to get to him.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Beautifully said again. And another thing that I've noticed in the men that I've been speaking to is that a lot of them want to talk about these things, but they're worried about saying the wrong thing. And that stops them from sharing their truth in a lot of ways. And you're obviously a man who is able to share his truth quite confidently. What advice would you give to men that are struggling with this aspect? They're worried about saying the wrong thing or being called out or just feeling like they can't speak their truth.
A couple things. One, I would share that I actually have a free resource called the Hard Conversations Playbook, which has some scripts that men can use to work on these things.
Great.
But part of it really boils down to building resilience, the ability to build emotional resilience and speak for what you want. Instead of worrying about trying to say the right thing, which is very much nice guy, people pleasing behavior,
Mm-hmm.
it's really like identifying, okay, this is what I want and speaking up for it. And it doesn't mean that the conversations are always going to be easy. I got into a hard conversation a few weeks ago before the time of this recording when I shared something that I wanted with my mistress. It wasn't an easy conversation. And it ended up being a conversation that lasted several nights. We really ended up having to talk about it. We've even talked about it since then. And yet at the same time, I knew that I was in integrity with myself and with her by bringing up what I needed to speak to. And that by doing that, it actually helped us to feel more connected and aligned than if I didn't say anything. One
Mm.
of the things that kills relationships and dynamics is what we don't say.
Mm-hmm.
So what we don't say in a relationship is what defines that relationship. And
Mm-hmm.
that's why having these hard conversations is so important. And so, one of the things that I like to do when I work with men is actually help them build the emotional resilience to have the conversations. And a lot of times, the reason why men are really afraid is because whether they realize it or not, they're projecting their mother wound onto their partners.
Mm-hmm.
You know, they got wounded early on by their mom. And I say this as somebody who dealt with it myself. I mean, I can look back at most of my relationships and say I was basically dating either my mom or my stepmom, whether I realized it or not,
Mm.
because I was trying to resolve something in my life through that relationship. And we don't want to be doing that. Just like women don't want to project their father wound onto men, and that happens as well. We don't want to be projecting those onto the relationship. And yet a lot of times that happens until we reach a certain point where we've kind of we own the projection, we take it back, and then we start forming a relationship with the actual person. And part of that means having the hard conversations because you're not worried about making mom angry, so to speak. You're not
Mm.
worried about making dad angry. Instead, you're like, oh, I can engage with this person. And maybe they will be angry, but that anger doesn't mean they don't want me. It doesn't mean they're going to abandon me or that they're going to hurt me. That anger means that, okay, there is a point of contact here. And one of the things that we need to discover is can we be okay together through a rough time? Because if we can come out the other side okay together, if we can come out the other side in contact and connection, then we can work through anything.
Mm. Mm-hmm. I love all of that. And I think one of the things that really stood out to me then was that you highlighted with your mistress that it's been an ongoing conversation. You brought up something and it wasn't just one little conversation. It's been ongoing for several conversations over multiple days, and that's okay too. It doesn't have to be resolved straight away.
It
Mm-hmm.
really doesn't. And
Mm-hmm.
sometimes it won't be resolved straight away, but you're not serving her, or I'm not serving her. I'll just put it this way, but I'm not serving her if I don't bring it to her.
Mm-hmm.
And by the same extension, I mean, part of the hard conversation that we ended up having was around like recognizing how both of us were actually pulling back a bit from each other. So like by me actually bringing up something that needed to be said, it helped us to see where there was some distance there and for us to reorient toward each other.
Mm.
That's why these hard conversations are so important. So I would say out there to anybody, whether it's a man or a woman, because really this applies to both or other identified, what I would share really is the hard conversations, as scary as they might seem in the moment, are actually easier the more you have them. And they don't have to, they won't define your relationship any longer. Yeah, you'll have a few moments where it feels a bit rough, but you'll come out the other side in contact with each other. And if you don't come out on the other side in contact with each other, that might actually be a good indicator there that you were trying to make something work that wasn't going to work.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Wonderful. So, another tradition that we have on the podcast is exploring a piece of research with you. And today I want to explore a qualitative study which looked at how dominants and submissives live their BDSM identities. So, for this research, they performed semi-structured interviews with 9 dominants and 12 submissives, and then explored this using thematic analysis. Participants described dominance as empathic and nurturing, desiring and able to take control, attentive and responsible, while submissives were characterised as willing to give up control and having a desire to please. So interviewees described ways in which their BDSM role fit with their overall personality, as well as incongruities between their role in BDSM play and their day-to-day personas. So some submissive men in the study said that they always feel submissive, whether they're wearing their collar or in a scene or just in their day-to-day lives. Whereas others felt that they are submissive in the bedroom and feel otherwise in other parts of their life. I'm curious to know, how does submission show up for you? Are you always in that headspace, or does it only show up erotically for you or in particular situations?
I would say that submission shows up for me as an experience. There's definitely the erotic component, but there's also the component of how it shows up in my everyday life as it relates to my mistress.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't really show up with other people. Other than that, I definitely operate from what I'll call a place of servant leadership,
Mm.
which, is really important. So there is, because I definitely have, as you noted earlier, kind of, speaking very confidently and everything else, I definitely would come off in some ways as, oh, that person's coming from a dominant space. But really where I'm coming from is a place of servant leadership, where it is of being of service to the communities that I'm part of. It's not, and so that's a really important component of that. And I think that's how my submission shows up in that way. And then otherwise it just shows up in just kind of the overall orientation and attunement of my life toward the work that I'm called to, both magical work and the work with men.
Mm-hmm.
And then of course in the bedroom, and also in relationship to my beloved when I'm with her. And even when I'm not with her, because as I mentioned earlier, we're in a long distance relationship, which brings its own interesting challenges at times.
Mm-hmm. The research also frames submission as a skill set, not just a desire. What skills have you had to consciously develop or are perhaps still developing to live submission well for your mistress?
Holding presence is a really big one.
Mm.
How do I show up with presence, awareness, and attention? And it's not just about listening, although that's certainly an important skill to cultivate, but it's more feeling into the energy and the experience. It's being able to connect with her especially from in a situation where we are long distance. She lives in another country, so it's not like I can even go up and see her all the time when I want to. There's very much that aspect. So it's being able to fully attune and connect with her in the moment, whether it's through voice notes or Zoom or when we're in person, being able to connect that way, especially because we're also doing some professional stuff together. So
Oh,
part
cool.
of it is even being fully in alignment with each other in that way and fully showing up in service in the communities that we're part of. And I think that that's a big thing is like, how do I cultivate that presence? That is something that I continually am working at and developing. And then that same thing applies in other spaces. I actually, it was interesting. I mentioned earlier the cohort that I joined. One of the things that was interesting is that we had our kickoff call, and one of the other men had a reaction to me. He felt triggered in a certain way. Part of it was me introducing myself, part of it was my appearance, and he wrote in the shared internet forum what his things were, and I could have reacted to that, or I could show up with presence. And what I ended up doing was really just showing up with curious presence, giving him some warmth and encouragement, applauding him for being brave enough to actually speak up to like what was being triggered and coming up for him, because that's a huge thing for a man to do that, especially when it's with other men, because a lot of times men are very uncomfortable with each other. We haven't really been taught how to relate to each other emotionally. And so for him to do that, I needed to show up a presence. I needed to be there in service to him, regardless of what his projections or anything else were in regards to me.
Mm, okay. Sounds like an interesting group you have there. You mentioned that you're doing some work with your mistress. Can you share a little bit more about that at all?
Yeah, I can. So I have sovereign submission, which is the work I do with men. And then I have magical experiments, and magical experiments is my magical occult community. And she and I are co-running that community together, teaching classes together. I've had magical experiments for over 20 years. I've written a huge number of books on the occult and magic over the years. She's recently joined me in that work, and so we're teaching classes together. We're doing other things along those lines. And so that's a huge part of that presencing with her in that space.
Mm-hmm. Amazing. So you've mentioned that you have this incredible woman in your life. How did you actually meet each other?
Well, she found me through my work years ago, through one of my books, but we didn't actually connect until she had signed up for one of my classes. I was teaching a class called Advanced Inner Alchemy of Life, where I was sharing with people how to connect with the neurotransmitters, the hormones, and bacteria of their body as living spirits and work with them collaboratively.
Mm.
And so she took that class, and then we continued to connect. And, I'd say about a half a year into that connection, I said to her, I'd like to get to know you in a different context. I'd like to work with you as a magical partner. And she was willing to do that. And then within a week after that, and so we kind of changed the dynamic there. As a result, we needed to. And then a week after that, we were continuing to talk, and we both decided we wanted to explore a romantic connection. And so we did that. And then one of the things that I said to her then at the beginning is I said, because you've taken a couple of my classes and other things, one of the things I really want to step back from is doing anything professional for a little while at least with you, because I need to know that we're getting to know each other and that we're doing it from the right space. Because I've had people in the past where that blended way too quickly and it created a lot of problems. And so we waited a few months and just kind of saw how it focused on building the personal relationship. But then after that, we both agreed we wanted to see where things could go in a professional setting. And so we have since then been exploring that, and we found, I think, a really good balance between both the professional and personal. And the the aspect of my submission to her shows up there because I feel like she gives me a ton of clarity, focus, and direction that's actually really paying off in terms of just the success of both of my businesses because of the way she's able to see certain things and call things in for me that I need to be paying attention to that I wouldn't necessarily do otherwise. So I'm profoundly grateful to her for that, and at the same time, just grateful to be in relationship with her.
It sounds like a very fruitful relationship. So, what does being met actually look like in this female led dynamic from a male submissive viewpoint? Can you give us some day to day examples?
First, I'll say that we're in with each other, and what I mean by that is that we are in with, through, and for each other. We're committed to each other in that way. There's another community we're part of called the Evolutionary Collective that explores this idea of being in and what that means. And it's just this idea of being able to meet somebody at their origination point, the point of contact, you might say, of the soul in some ways, but it goes even deeper than that. But how I feel that she meets me, especially when it's long distance, it's it's kneeling to her every day and recording a voice note and having her receive that. It's connecting through Zoom and talking for a while about what we're going to respectively work on or what we're engaged in. It's the question of the day that we ask each other, and that I also get to ask her husband. So we have an open relationship. She's married, and so part of this is also necessarily involved getting to know him and connecting with him. And so there's that aspect as well. And it's even us meeting, all three of us meeting when we play online board games or do something else along those lines. So it's just this continual evolution of relationship with
Mm,
each other, but also with ourselves. I mean, for me, part of being met by her is also the way that I've met myself. One of
mm,
the things that she got to witness at the beginning of our romantic relationship was me wrapping up a series of very intensive workshops and experiences where, among other things, I was healing my wound around one of my core wounds around the feminine, because I didn't want to bring that into any more relationships, and that was the mother wound that I spoke to earlier. I was healing some of that and working through it and integrating it. And so being able to be witnessed by that and having her be able to fully meet me, and at the same time having us and ending up doing a ceremony and ritual together when we were in person where we did some medicine work together. And one of the things that I said to her is I do not put my projection of the mother onto you.
mhm,
And her accepting that and thanking me for not doing that. And so us being able to be in and receive each other that way was also really powerful.
Yeah, it sounds really profound. So for those submissive men that are listening and, thinking that they want to find an amazing woman like you have, what advice would you give them in finding the dominant woman that they're seeking?
I think it's really important to be clean and clear with what you want
Hmm.
within yourself, and then be clean and clear with the people that you're involved with and engaged with. And that means being don't play subtle games. Don't like put her in a position where you're like trying to get her to dominate you.
Right.
Speak for what you want, because by speaking up for what you want, it doesn't mean that you're going to get it, or you might get it, and then you get to decide how much you like that. But what it does mean is that you are showing up with the kind of presence that I think women crave and want and long for from men and don't get enough of, because men are too busy playing mind games. And a lot of times they're playing mind games with themselves. So it's not even that they're trying to play mind games with her, they're playing mind games with themselves because of the way society has programmed us and set us up. But we don't have to do that. We get the choice to make that change. And one of the ways we do that is by getting clear and clean with what we truly want and then choosing to live our lives that way. Because if you're willing to live your life that way, regardless of whether you have a dominant woman in your life or not, you will call that woman into your life at some point. It'll just make it that much easier, because some woman's going to see that and it's going to click, and then you'll have that dynamic.
Mm-hmm. Mm. Okay, so as part of our conversation today, I asked you to bring along something to share, such as a quote, book, or a movie that's influenced your eroticism. Can you share with us what you've brought along today and how it shaped your erotic realm?
Yeah. There's a book, a number of books really, I could say, but this is an important one that I read a couple of years ago that profoundly shaped my understanding of my own eroticism. It's called The Passion Trap by Dean DeLeese.
Okay.
And it's an exploration of how in relationship people get into a passion trap where one person is pursuing the other and the other person is pulling away.
Mm.
And it creates an unconscious power dynamic that actually is really unhealthy. Reading that book really helped me understand the ways that I, as a nice guy, was creating that unhealthy dynamic in my relationships. And it helped me to really start to pull out and bring into clarity and awareness, like, what did I really want? And what did it mean to desire and long and want to be with somebody without necessarily putting it on them in a way that was an unconscious power dynamic? It's a book that I would recommend really anyone read as a way of understanding how unconscious power dynamics show up in relationships.
That sounds amazing. I haven't heard of it. Thank you. I'm going to look that up. Okay, so you've had all of these incredible experiences by the sounds of it, and you've explored so much magic and these different sides of yourself. I'm so interested to hear from you about a peak erotic experience that you're happy to share with us today, an experience throughout this time that's just really stuck with you. What comes to mind when I ask you about a peak erotic experience?
I had one of the most amazing experiences in 2025 with my mistress.
Mm.
One of the things that I requested of her is that we actually did a sex magic um, ritual where she would claim me as her submissive magically as well as sexually and erotically. And I was up visiting her, um, and we created and crafted this perfect experience that really, in my particular case, allowed me to step fully into my submission in a very conscious and aware way, and for her to fully accept and receive me. And it was such a beautiful experience because it was something that lasted most of the day, and it was purposely created, exploring aspects of the dark and aspects of our respective desires. Some part of the time I was doing some service topping, part of the time it was some other things. She was leading me on a journey, but and part of it was even a worship of Aphrodite, who is my patron goddess, and who she took on as her patron goddess as well, as part of that, because it was just a fundamental recognition of how powerfully that particular deity has spoken to me throughout my entire life. And so that was a really fundamental peak erotic experience for me.
It sounds incredible. Thanks for sharing. So that's something that you've enjoyed in your past. What about the future? What are you looking forward to? What's something that you're excited about exploring with your mistress or just in general in the future?
Right now I'm really excited about the next 6 months in this cohort that I was telling you about earlier.
Hmm.
Um, because we're gonna be we're already just we just started diving into this relationship between masculine puberty and the changes that go on for a man, like how that changes, and then exploring that in relationship to pornography and how that's shown up, and like what our relationship with sexuality is and how that may have been shaped in certain ways. And for me, that is something I'm really looking forward to because I feel like it's leading me even deeper into this work and how I can better show up for the men that I work with and the communities that I serve, especially when there's this fundamental recognition, like for myself, where I'm like, I'm getting the opportunity to not just work with my inner boy, but also my inner teenager, and recognizing, like in his particular case, how his voice felt locked down and unlocking that. But then also my inner 20 something, my inner 30 something, and my inner early 40 something before I got into the work that I'm doing. Like this is encouraging me to explore a number of different angles that then I can bring to this work that I do with other men.
Mm-hmm. Beautiful. So you've shared a little bit about your work. Can you tell us exactly what you're offering at the moment and where men can find your work if they want to explore this path more deeply with you?
Yes. As I mentioned earlier, I have a hard conversations playbook, which men can get through my website, sovereignsubmission.com. And I offer a breakthrough session called the Crucible, which is just like a 90-minute session. And then I also have a 3-month initiation experience for men. I also have a couples crucible, which is a 3-month experience for both men and women in the relationship of building a solid foundation for the dynamic. And I have a class that's starting up soon. It may or may not have happened by the time this airs, but it's called Speak so she can feel you. And I'm going to have additional classes around anxiety and fear, pornography addiction, sex addiction, things like that, all of which I'm intimately familiar with, um, to better serve men and help them explore how to get back into their bodies and their emotions and presence so that they can fully show up in service.
Incredible. Thanks for offering that work. It's so needed. So if you had to describe your erotic self in one word, what would it be and why?
Magical. And why? Because magic has played such a fundamental role in my life. It has led me to the deepest explorations of myself, the highest expressions of my being, and it continually calls me in with wonder and curiosity and imagination into the world.
Mm-hmm. I love it. Well, Taylor, thank you for sharing your erotic realm, for speaking so clearly about devotion, masculinity, sovereignty, and the strength of surrender. And thank you for the work that you're doing with men. I really appreciate it. It's been an absolute pleasure holding this conversation with you.
Thank you for having me on here. It's been a pleasure to be here, and I'm so excited to connect with anyone who chooses to connect with me. Thank you.
Thank you again. I'm Em, and this has been the Erotic Realm podcast. Thank you for listening to the Erotic Realm. If this episode stirred something in you, please take a moment to follow the show, leave a rating, or write a review on wherever you're listening. It helps more people find the show and brings visibility to this deeper conversation about eroticism and self-understanding. I'd also like to invite you to dive deeper into the psychology of desire, including my writing, research, and upcoming courses over at psychologyofdesire.com. And if you want the full experience, join thousands of curious minds on my Substack at psychologyofdesire.substack.com. This is where I release the Psychology of Desire case files, behind-the-scenes thoughts, and intimate reflections every week, plus more. Until next time, stay curious, stay embodied, and keep exploring. Also, as always, stay perverted.